Hey everyone, welcome to Tuesday morning. You know, you're in a room of diehards when you get up at 8 a.m, you don't hit snooze and you're coming to a session about DEI. My name's Marcus Vaughan. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you here today. As Vanessa mentioned, I'm the co-founder of iluminr, and today we're going to go through together the world's greatest DEI microsimulation. But to get started, we need to address a question, and probably the elephant in the room. Why are we talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And why is there a middle-aged white guy on stage talking about, or trying to mansplain potentially, DEI? And just to round that out, he's a vendor. Like, are you kidding me? So I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. A few times through preparing for this presentation, I did turn to my team and said, have I actually bitten off more than I can chew? Yes. Fact. Answer, yes. So I don't have all the answers for DEI. Be brutally open, very honest, very transparent. But I have the willingness to take the first steps on a journey. And it has been a journey. It's been a very challenging journey, right up to yesterday. And we'll talk through this when we get into the panel discussion around preparing for this particular session. DEI is something that has been very close to my heart, though, as a person and as a tech co-founder. So anyone that has had anything to do with iluminr before knows that Josh, my co-founder, and I are absolutely passionate about culture, and that's driven by our values. And one of our values is to walk in others' shoes, and it's around having an open mind to understanding and embrace others. Now, we work within a community. Our partners, our customers, it's a community, it's a society, and it's a very diverse one. And we think by the best way to essentially support our customers, our partners, and our community is to represent within our organization the fabric of the community that exists out there from a diversity perspective. That way we can have a truly unique approach to really understanding what is happening, what are the challenges that our customers and our partners are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So this is a very big thing for us. This is what we hire to, this is how we build culture, and this is how we represent ourselves within the community in which we operate. Now when DRJ and Bob Arnold at DRJ says, hey, we're going to launch our DEI initiative, that for me is a really great opportunity to go, this is our community, and how can we align and support our community, not in having all the answers, but in taking those first steps on a journey. Secondly, performance. And I think this is a really underrated thing about DEI. If you do any research around DEI and diversity, you'll find that there is a whole stack of research out there that shows that well-managed and diverse teams will perform from a productivity perspective and drive more innovation than those that are not. Now, for a budding tech startup company, innovation and productivity, you don't have a company without them. So again, I always look at performance and go, this is good for business. And I also think about it from a resilience perspective. Everyone in this room, as I think of you, are resilience coaches. We're here not just to provide training and provoke thought, but we're here as resilience practitioners and resilience coaches to look at our organization, the teams and the people that we're dealing with day in, day out, and looking at what are the skills and capabilities that we are doing well at, and what are those areas that we can take that level of performance with the teams that we operate from here to here. It doesn't have to be an overnight success story, but it is around identifying those opportunities to grow the people that we work with in, day out, to provoke thought. And you have to do, how do we do that? We do that through deliberate practice. A Formula One driver does not get on the track without hours of deliberate practice. An astronaut does not go into space without years of deliberate practice. And a violinist does not get on stage, again, without years and years and years of deliberate practice. And so as resilience coaches, today for us is around taking some time out to spend some time on some deliberate practice on an area that we might not all be 10 out of 10 from a maturity perspective on yet. This is around a journey. Now, how do we get deliberate practice in the resilience profession? One way that I know how, that I've spent most of my life dedicated to now, is simulations. We all love a simulation. Experiential learning at its absolute best. You retain 70% of the knowledge that you drive when you actually put into practice something that you're learning. So today's session is not just about me standing on stage trying to teach you about DEI. Absolutely not. No. We're going to run micro-simulations today. We're going to challenge the thought in the room, challenge our own thoughts. Like I said before, it's been very challenging for me, but it has helped me grow as a person and as a resilience professional. And today we're going to run through 3 micro-simulations, and through that practice, the way that this will run is we'll run a micro-simulation, a QR code is going to come up on screen, point your phone and camera at the QR code, it's going to take you into a little drop-down menu. You'll be able to select the response. Everything's anonymous, don't worry. We're all here to fail in a safe space together, like me. We're going to go through the answers, we're going to have a panel discussion about that and open up conversation with that. Towards the end of the session, we have kept some time aside for Q&A. You'll use your Cvent app, so the app that you've been using for the whole conference. Please do drop in your questions there. This is an opportunity to have a conversation. Like I said, we don't have all the answers here. We have an opportunity to take the first steps on a journey together. Now, before we get into micro-simulations, I would like to welcome back to the stage a very diverse team that has helped me get through DEI. Vanessa Vaughan-Matthews of Asphalis Advisory. Someone we all know and love. James Green from iluminr Advisory. And Lisa Jones in the house from Risk Control. Sorry. All right, well, we might roll into the first micro-simulation. So strap in for the ride and start watching our first micro-simulation on DEI. Let's roll.
A global training organization is under fire for allegedly discriminating against employees with disabilities by forcing them to return to the office, despite the shift to remote work arrangements. This decision has had a significant impact on their well-being and job performance, leading to decreased productivity and quality of work. The decision to reverse the progress made towards inclusion and accessibility has placed the organization at risk of legal action and could have detrimental impacts to the company's reputation and bottom line. Stay tuned for further updates as the situation unfolds.
All right, now this is where it gets interactive. So get the phone out of your pocket if you haven't already. This is the one session today where you're not going to get blasted for using your phone halfway through the session. Please do scan the code. You're going to give a couple of options there. And the question that's come up is, does your current resilience program consider duty of care if there are no floor wardens available to assist evacuation? Now, this is an objective question, really just looking at the big push that may or may not be happening within your workforces at the moment to return to work. It is a way to look at just one very basic element of, if not everyone's back at work yet, are we prepared for that if we're somewhere halfway between? And we'll just give it a moment while our results are coming through. A quick hands up in the audience. We'll poll while we poll. Who here has a major push to get everyone back into the office this year? Whose organisation? Like a big push. Okay, just looking out. Maybe 10 to 20%. Nice. Lighter than I was expecting. I'm hearing a few stories of that starting to come through. Okay, and our results are yes, we've addressed the duty of care from floor wardens to assist in evacuation. All right, well, we'll pull the polling there. We had a big conversation, team, about disabilities yesterday, or different abilities. And I think there's this premise that it is still quite often somewhat of an afterthought. I mean, how much experience or how much consideration, I guess in your experience at the moment as resilience practitioners, do you think are given to disabilities? Lisa, I might start with you.
So, from past experience of working in an organization, we did take into account some disabilities, but I think as we look at the landscape, the ones that we see, we talk about, is there physical disabilities, hearing impaired, Is there sight disabilities? Those things are easy to identify in a person. But what about those unseen disabilities that we don't always see? Mental disabilities. We don't take those things into account. I don't think I've ever thought about it. When we were talking about this, just in our conversation, I was like, wait a minute, I don't think I've ever thought about that. I've had a colleague tell me one time, who was hearing impaired, when they would do the fire drills in her office, she would always be left behind. And her coworker said to her, "Oh, I just thought you were just so involved in your work. I didn't realize that you did not hear the fire alarm." So I think for us, particularly with confidentiality, we don't always know. You know, people don't have to share if they have a disability. HR might know. They do ask those questions, but legally, you know, you can't tell the whole organization. So how do you address that when you're talking about planning?
James?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Lisa said, the four of us have had so many conversations the last few weeks where I've been taking notes for myself. I never thought of this, or I should have looked at this from another angle. And regarding your first question, so I've been in the profession 15 years. This conversation has been brought up as a practitioner once at a company I worked at, and as a consultant, never. So it's very rarely brought up to me, and honestly, I've never brought it up myself. So yeah, I don't think we're having those conversations enough when it comes to this.
Yeah, I think I'd probably mirror that. I think we've had that request once from a government agency client, and that is it. We've never had that asked from our technology as well. It's like, does this take into account, I guess, a variety of abilities and disabilities? So certainly, Lisa?
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up a point that I found fascinating. So the Economic Innovation Group back in October 2022 said remote working is enabling higher employment among disabled workers, which surpassed pre-pandemic levels. They said 3.5% growth in the age of 25 to 24-year-olds were able to get jobs during the pandemic working remotely. So we can't say that this is an outlier. We do have to be proactive about this. So I think that was the aha moment for me to think about, well, what were they doing before that? And it's because of the challenges of ADA requirements for buildings, because of not being able to truly work in an office setting. So now that we're asking people to come back to work, we really got to be cognizant about that.
Yeah, which drives another talent crunch that we're already struggling with.
Correct.
God, I don't need recruitment to get any harder, that's for sure. Vanessa?
Same. I've been in the Homeland Security emergency management space for 15 years. I've owned my business now. October will be our 9th year in business. I've never had a customer ask, but also what we talked about yesterday is I've never asked, right? We have one customer who is operating in Mexico, so we took the initiative to hire someone that was bilingual. We now have someone on our team who speaks in sign because her children are deaf. So now I think we're better positioned to ask better questions, but I think that we've lacked the awareness. Coupled to some stats that Lisa shared, the US Census did a study in December of 2022. They sent it to 1 million people, 70,000 people responded. And what I thought was interesting is that 59% of deaf evacuees post-disaster report that they never get to go back home. So just like it's almost 60% of 70,000 people. 70% of deaf people who were evacuated reported living in an unsanitary condition, so no water, no electricity, post-disaster. And then more than 74% of evacuees are unable to walk, who are unable to walk, reported not having access to food post-disaster. And so when we think about it from the context of resilience, I think it's important because we influence policies or decisions that impact communities that we don't understand or that we don't represent. but we don't understand the impacts of those decisions or sitting at a table speaking up or not speaking up about these diverse populations. And so I think that it matters, but unfortunately, like we learned, we haven't been asking either.
Yeah, 100%. And why is this the case? Why is disability still an afterthought, James?
You know, I think we all operate in a world in our own bubble. And so we were talking about the things that are known. If you have a family member who's affected by something, then you're very aware of that and you're in tune to that. And if it's not, a lot of people aren't ignorant due to malicious reasons, they're not thinking about it. But like Lisa said, the world has changed. Prior to COVID, you had a lot of people who weren't able to work in a traditional retail environment or service or manufacturing or 9 to 5. And with work from home, you now have the most diverse workforce we've probably ever had in terms of abilities and different abilities. And how do we, as business continuity practitioners, right, we're responsible for business continuity and crisis management of all of our employees. So many of us have, like Vanessa said, we have new employees that have different abilities that we didn't have before. And if we're looking at enterprise-wide business continuity, we have to make sure that we're truly taking care of the entire enterprise.
So I have a question. Raise your hand if you watched the Super Bowl. Okay. Raise your hand if you saw the first deaf woman perform at the Super Bowl. So I learned, like, within the past week that at the 2023 Super Bowl, literally the first female deaf woman performed at the Super Bowl, but it was not advertised live. So how many millions of people watched the Super Bowl? So it's great that she was invited, but literally, if you were able to see her, you had to stream it through another avenue, and you didn't have the convenience of flipping on your TV and watching it live. So I think it continues to perpetuate the story and probably the experience that our different ability community has, where I'm sidelined. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants, I mean, you know, I want a ring too, but I don't want to be on the sideline to get the ring. I'm trying to be in the game. So that's a big difference of how many people watch the Super Bowl, but maybe less than 5 hands actually saw that performance. It was an inconvenient way to have that experience.
Yeah, fascinating. Lisa, anything you want to add?
No, I just agree with Vanessa. I always agree with Vanessa.
Always. Okay, so question for all of us in this room, like when and how do we start that conversation about disabilities and resilience with the organizations we're operating in?
And I want to be cognizant that, again, when we talk about disabilities, particularly in our organizations, that information is confidential. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can't just say, are you disabled? You know, is it you? No, you can't do that. But in the same vein, if we just take the time to, A, be cognizant of it, you know, have the conversations, put things in place. I mean, I understand that most of us in this room are not the true decision makers. We only help to influence those decisions, and that's our job, is to help influence decisions. We may not be in the executive suite, but when we do have the ear of our leaders, that's our job, is to just make people aware, give them the facts, allow them to make those decisions. In the end, all of this conversation about D&I, it really is about the continuity of people. We started that conversation, I want to say 3, 4, or 5 conferences ago. I remember when one of my first conferences was, we were talking about human continuity, people continuity, and that's what this conversation in the end is really about. How do we take care of our people? How do we ensure that people are recognized? Because we can only do a better job when we include everyone.
Cool. All right, well, we've got a lot more to get through, and DEI is a lot more than purely just looking at disabilities. So we might roll into the next microsimulation video, and we'll open this up even more. So yeah, strap in, here we go.
One of the world's largest professional services organization has been hit with a data breach, which has exposed staff salaries and revealed a significant pay gap between male and female employees performing the same roles. The breach has caused an uproar among staff, leading to a group of female employees walking out in protest. The company's social media page has been inundated with negative comments, and the organization's reputation is at stake. The company is now operating on a skeleton staff, with shareholders keeping a watchful eye on developments. The CEO has emphasized the company's commitment to ensuring the safety and security of its employees' data and to addressing any issues of inequality or discrimination. He has called for an urgent meeting with the board to address the issue and prevent further harm to the organization's reputation. This is a developing story, and we will continue to provide updates as they become available.
All right, so I've got a professional services firm in a bit of hot water there. All right, time to get the phones out and look at the question there. So we're looking at whether your organisation has considered a crisis response. I can't even read the question.
It's hard to read that.
Good eyes, Marcus. Great. Not getting old at all. Has your organisation considered a crisis response for gender equality risks? Here we go. Lots of little purple dots. A lot more hitting the no, which I'm not all that surprised at. Whilst that's polling through, we might get into a conversation about gender. Again, provoked by a white man. So
You're doing good, Marcus.
here we go. Wind it up.
What could possibly go wrong?
Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to ask this one straight to you, James.
Well, thank you.
There's someone else in the room. So why do we believe we're still facing a gender representation issue in crisis management teams? Lisa, I'm interested in your opinion on this.
Yeah, of course, ask me. This one is even tough for me. Backtrack. It's a constant concern, something that all organizations are facing. We already know that we've been talking about gender equality, pay equity, since the 70s, 80s, and it's 2023, and women are still getting paid 80 cents on the dollar. Minority women maybe 40 to 60 cents on the dollar, possibly. So it almost feels like it's something that overwhelms people that they can't even deal with it. I think from our perspective as practitioners, regardless of how we feel about this topic, there's still a need to truly consider how we would handle something like this in our organization. I mean, this is a real thing that has happened. Currently, Goldman Sachs is going through a class action suit where women. It's a 12-year-old suit, which is just going to court.
Just going to trial.
In June, 12 years, but no pressure. Where women have, it's about almost 1,000 women have joined this class action suit about being paid less than men or not getting the promotion. So it's a real thing. It may not be advertised. It may not be something that we consider. But again, now we know more. How will we address this?
Vanessa?
What was the question again?
Why do you think we're still facing a gender representation issue in crisis management teams in particular?
Well, I think it's like with a lot of things, it's because we're underrepresented. So Security Magazine came out with a report, and I'll do a parallel of a different industry. In 2020, 81% of mid-level and executive level roles were white males. 81%. In 2020, representation increased for gender by 14%. 1% of an increase was for race and ethnicity, which basically tells you that the 14% were not Black, Indigenous people of color. So if 81%, just in the security industry, and it's a parallel industry, we all work with security teams, if 81% of that population of managers and senior executives who make decisions, who make hiring decisions, who determine how much we get paid, who hold the social capital, then it's a no-brainer as to why we're underrepresented, right? So we talked about this yesterday. As a Black female, or as a Black person, my experience has been I have to do business with people who don't look like me in order to be successful. Most white people do not have to do business, interact, or do anything with a person of color to be successful because we don't hold the keys to wealth from a global perspective. So there's a challenge when this case is we're talking about gender. So specifically as a woman, if I'm walking into an environment with all men, what is my experience and how is that different than a man? But then we talked about yesterday, binary and non-binary, right? So we were having a conversation and one of us was saying, well, ladies and gentlemen. And then we had to catch one another and like, well, that could be offensive because we're excluding another demographic who may not identify as that. Whether you like it or love it, it is what it is. So we had to rethink, what are we gonna say on this stage and how do we make sure that we're showing up and being transparent of even where we're not thinking about different dimensions of diversity.
Well, and a quick hands up poll here, I think, just to touch on that point, because it was a big conversation that we ended up having. So hands up in the room if the chair of your CMT identifies as a male.
As a man?
As a male,
Man.
yeah, as a man.
Chair?
Yep. Hands up if the chair of your CMT identifies as a female. And then hands up if the chair of your CMT identifies as non-binary. Okay.
No hands.
I think it's 0. So, and we've got obviously an imbalance there. And I guess that's, an indicator of the, diversity issue that we're facing even within the CMT, which is representative of how we might tackle a problem when a professional services firm, if we're that, are facing that gender equality issue from a salary perspective.
Yeah, I want to go back to the microsim because I think one of the best ways to eliminate pay inequality is compensation transparency. You know, the National Labor Relations Board in the United States has repeatedly ruled that employees are allowed to discuss pay with each other, that they cannot be penalized for that, but we continue to see lawsuits where I share my salary information with Vanessa, we find out there's a disparity, I get in trouble, I get written up. You see a lot of employee handbooks where it says you cannot discuss pay. That's illegal. And one way we can kind of eliminate that, I find the clients I work with, the more transparent the company is with salary bands and where people are in those bands, the closer they are equality across the board. And then to Vanessa's point, certainly most organizations, our crisis management team is a reflection, if not exactly our management team. So the CMT looks like management, and if management is all a certain way, if you have, let's be honest, we were talking about this yesterday, my wife experiences this all the time. She's in the C-suite, she's head of HR, that's diversity for companies. So it's 5 white gentlemen, it's 1 white woman, and okay, we have diversity on our executive team. And you see that reflection in crisis management teams. So CMTs to me are typically a reflection of on organizations management. So as we continue to have those disparities and that lack of representation in management, you have that lack of representation in crisis management. And I think that's a real problem for organizations, because when you don't have diversity representation, you don't have diversity of thought. And during a crisis, I don't want, as much as my ego might, have 10 James Greens all in the room. We've all got the same ideas, right? And we all have the same answer to the same problem. I need diversity of thought when we're on that bridge at 3 in the morning trying to figure out the next pandemic or whatever it is. So I need different solutions, I need different answers. You only get that when you have diversity of thought and diversity of representation on that crisis management team.
I don't know, James. I think 10 Jameses on a crisis management team would be great.
I think that would be a crisis in on itself, honestly. So.
But I just wanted to, I agree with you on the fact that, that groupthink is something that hinders most organizations. We saw through the pandemic, the teams that the organizations that thought outside the box, that were able to pivot, are those teams that had that diverse thought process. So no different than us, we need to, we can only grow by having those diverse thoughts.
Yeah. So I want to touch on something that James talked about, because you talked about senior leadership and, our corporate boards, our C-suite, the tier below the C-suite, and then the middle management, and then there's entry level. So there's oftentimes companies that talk about their recruitment efforts for diverse talent at an entry level perspective, and that's great. Maybe it'll help from a sustainability perspective, but what happens is that they're hitting a barrier and a wall, because everything above entry level is not a reflection of your diverse workforce. So talk about Goldman Sachs. They made an announcement pre-COVID that they will only approve an IPO if it has a woman on its board. So here's the question. Yesterday's panel with Eric, Melanie, and Jonathan, they talked about the need to ask better questions, right? So if they're only approving an IPO if it has a woman on its board, the question that we have to ask is, where are we finding these women? And when we say women, what do you mean? So if you look at the data, there's a study by Catalyst. Between 2016 and 2018, there were 230 new board seats for Fortune 500 companies. Out of those 230 board seats, 124 of those seats went to white women. 53%. 32 seats went to black women at 14%. 17 of those seats went to Asian women at 7%. And four seats went to Hispanic women at 2%. So typically, human resources teams have been comprised of white women. And I'm saying this to say, we have to think about, as an industry, who are we intentionally or unintentionally excluding? And just because you're a woman does not mean that you are diverse. Respectfully. Yeah. As a white female, unless you are gay or disabled, technically speaking, you're not diverse. But we bucket you, and typically, because of the seats and the roles that you sit in, you get to control the conversation, but we're excluding people. And so it's not until we do a simulation and talk about DE&I, it's not until we get a Bob Arnold to come on stage to talk about the importance of diversity, do we start to think differently. And so that's a part of the challenge, is how do we have more conversations where we're exposing the risk and we're talking about the risk of exclusion? Because why that matters is, when I first came out of a historically black college majoring in Homeland Security and Emergency Management, my first role was with a manufacturing and aviation company. And I walked in and I was the only of the only of the only. The only female, the only person under the age of 50, and the only person that was African American. And what I didn't know at the time is I walked into an environment that had operated for over 60 years in systematic racism. And I thought I was crazy. I was like, Lord, help me go inside today. I can't deal with these people, but I had no idea what I was actually experiencing. And the reason why that's important is because I had no one to go to.
Yeah.
There was no one in leadership for me to talk to, for me to share how I was or what I was experiencing, and then for someone to coach me, to then show me, well, then how do you respond in the face of adversity? So that's why it's important. No one can be successful at work if they're not given the tools to be successful. And a part of that success is you as a leader, you have to do that.
Yeah, we have to create that sense of belonging. And that's one of the concerns I have with the Goldman Sachs initiative, by saying we won't fund you unless you have one woman on your board. You know, a lot of those companies are going to have one. Like, check the box. That's what we talk a lot about in our profession. Are you checking the box, or are you actually making your organizations resilient? And I worry that a lot of these organizations are going to say, okay, well, we have to do this thing to get funding, right? We talked about yesterday with the rise and fall of DEI officers in companies.
Yeah.
So are these initiatives going to include more people? Are they truly going to make it diverse? Are we ultimately all going to feel a sense of belonging? Or is it just like a temporary spike for statistic purposes to make us feel better?
Well, and so that's the question for today, isn't it? It's like, how do we avoid the sugar rush? So we're on a journey here. We're trying to take steps in a direction. Like, how do we actually make incremental change, even if it is just incremental change, is better than no change at all? I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of this audience and taking that journey? Like, how do we create incremental change in this space? James.
I think we start by asking questions. None of us have the answers, and we don't pretend to stand up here and say, here's what you have to do. But just in our conversations preparing for this, we started thinking about things, all four of us, that we hadn't thought of before. And that's why we need stage time to talk about things we haven't always talked about, to get the conversation rolling. Bob's initiative with DRJ to get the conversation moving, not just as a token effort, not just as a social media campaign, but to actually create change. So we do have a wider sense of belonging in the industry. That's also how our industry will grow and thrive and continue.
Lisa, anything to add?
It's something that I think James and I have talked about many times, and it even goes back to my conversation about managing up and moving up, is the mentoring piece of it. And particularly when you're mentoring someone, you want to be intentional about who you're mentoring. Step out of your comfort zone. Maybe James always teases like, well, I'm not going to mentor, not because I don't like white people, but I'm not just going to mentor a white male because it's more comfortable for me to do that. Stepping out of his comfort zone. Maybe he's been a mentor to me. He doesn't know it yet, but he's been a mentor to me. So just feeling accepted. And I think even in this room, how much acceptance that we have for each other. It's been humbling to come to these conferences, to be surrounded by men and women who genuinely care about each other, or genuinely trying to push our industry forward. So just that small thing. Also, when you are in a leadership role, are you intentional when you are bringing someone else along? Are you looking when you're doing, whether it's through your interviews, when you are networking, just being intentional will help bridge that gap.
Vanessa?
So I'll keep it simple. How do we do it? How do we create the change? We have to model, we have to connect, we have to involve. So how do we model who we want to serve? That's a question. How do we connect with who we want to serve? and how do we involve who we want to serve? So pre-COVID, my team had a team of one. It was me, myself, and I. Post-COVID, we have a team of 14 people. And depending on the year, I am a minority in my own company. However, I still have to model, connect, and involve with every single one of those 14 people who see the world differently. We have different political views, but I have to, I'm a CEO to everybody, not just the people who look like me, right? So I too have to walk it and talk it like everybody else, and I have to have a network of my personal board of directors who keeps me aligned and who keeps me straight and who asks me the tough questions for me to go back and think about, is that the best way to handle that? Or are we really being inclusive or intentional with the population or with the group of people that maybe I don't fully understand, right? And so it's model, connect, and involve.
Good. Well, it's a big conversation. It's about to get bigger. We're going to roll into the final microsimulation. So when I say strap in, I really mean strap in. Let's roll for the third and final microsimulation.
A major crisis is unfolding for a global software provider as their executive team has failed to respond to growing calls to address its racial vilification of 2 employees after they were unduly asked to leave their head office cafe last week. After failing to produce identification, 2 African-American employees were exited from the business head office, despite colleagues providing first-hand testimonial to their right to be there. Crowds of demonstrators continue to grow at the company's head office, with staff reporting an increased level of absenteeism from colleagues nationwide. Stay tuned for further updates as this developing story unfolds.
Okay, phones out. Like I said, it didn't get any lighter. Just take a moment to accept that is the case. I know it's a pretty heavy conversation, guys, and like I said at the very beginning of this, I don't have to have all the answers. We're on a journey here. The question is, has your organisation considered the response to a racially sensitive scenario that impacts staff welfare and brand and reputation? Give everyone a moment to get the phones out, as if they weren't out already. Whilst we're waiting for those results to start filtering through, why do we believe this scenario is so important to simulate? Lisa, you're laughing.
Man.
So I'm going straight to you.
No, don't come to me first. Well, it's important because this is a true story. I mean, when we talked about this, we literally said Starbucks. Everyone goes to Starbucks. I love Starbucks. I live in the city where this happened. I used to go to that Starbucks when I worked in the city. So the fact that this is a real live thing that I never truly thought about, something that I would have to do a crisis management on or to consider. So this is, because it's a true story, we can all relate for our organizations, particularly when it comes to if something was to hurt our brand, how would we respond to that? What would we tell our senior execs when they're trying to mitigate this situation?
James?
Yeah, what do we always talk about in business continuity and crisis management? We talk about, are you exercising realistic and likely scenarios? And I know it's shocking for the audience, but unfortunately, racial insensitivity at a corporate level happens all the time. The example we used here, like Lisa talked about with a Starbucks, this wasn't a hypothetical. It happens. It has always happened. It continues to happen. Your organization needs to be prepared for any type of contingency in order to be resilient. And we've seen a lot of organizations, unfortunately, when they prepare or respond maybe in a slow manner or a less than thoughtful manner, they make it worse for themselves. A lot of these scenarios that we've talked about, they're just throwing gasoline on the fire,
Yeah.
right? With their response, with their lack of sensitivity. And I think it goes back to with the lack of diversity at the management level and in the crisis management level, because you have people responding to an incident or creating policies and they're not fully considering the diversity of their stakeholders, their customers, their shareholders. So,
Vanessa?
Can you repeat the question?
Why do you think this is so important to simulate? But I'm interested, because you do a lot of simulations for organizations. Have you actually been requested as a consultant to simulate something of this sort before?
So why I think it's important, I think from everything else, right? From disabilities to gender, what's interesting is race and ethnicity is the #1 leading hate crime. Followed by sexual misconduct, and then thirdly by religion. So those are the 3 buckets that spark a lot of issues from a US perspective. But no, I have never been asked by a customer to simulate a DE&I exercise. I've asked, and they looked at me like I was crazy. But I asked because I know that it's impacting your business and I know it's impacting your bottom line and your employees' experience. And I worked for a retail company previously, and there was a situation where a customer did not want a particular individual to visit their home to drop off a product. And it was all over the local news, and it was poor negative PR because this particular client of that company, just the way that this person spoke and how rude they were to an employee. And this particular company that I worked for, they handled it well, and they actually told that customer that because of how you've treated our employee, we don't want you as a customer. And so what I love about what you did today is you started with your values, and I think that's a conversation that we don't have often enough, is truly real crisis management and real resilience should support the values of the business. And I think we have space in this industry to start holding our companies accountable to what you say your values are. So one of our team members asked me recently, we were working with the customer, and we had to go down the list of our 6 core values because they are the only non-negotiables in our business, period. We fired clients, we fired vendors, we fired team members if you're not in alignment with the values. And this particular person on my team said, how is this client meeting our 6 core values? That was question number 1. And then question number 2 was, how is the Asfalis team aligning to our core values as we support this client? And he had us go down every 6 of those core values to answer that question. And what I loved about it is I created the values. It took me 9 years to figure them out, but I created the values and I wasn't the person who had to lead that conversation. So it's literally the values that drive everything. And I think if we're having more conversations that stem back to what our true values are, then it'll help to elevate this conversation.
Yeah. What's the best response you've seen taking into account race in a scenario like that? Anyone got any examples on that?
I mean, I think just Starbucks' response was stellar. I mean, they shut down all their stores and did, sensitivity training. Now, that might have been a little late, but again, you got to start somewhere, just like we're starting here. The fact that they apologized to these people, they met with them, really set a tone for me to continue to go to Starbucks and pay the $5 for a coffee, but no shade, but it showed their commitment to not only their customers but to their team members.
Owned a mistake. James, anything to add?
For me, in general, the best response is one that is a long-term, meaningful response. I'd love, Vanessa, you texted Lisa and I a study that was really surprising, and I think we should talk about that with the D&I, officers and professionals, because it kind of showed me, like, are we doing things temporarily, or are we actually looking to enact meaningful change?
So there's a study that came out, and I forgot to pull that before I got here. But the gist of it is, post George Floyd, corporations were making pledges and promises for their commitment to DE&I,
Yep.
and many rushed to a comment, right? And over time, there's been organizations who have tracked that data and tracked those pledges, right? And most companies said, you know, we'll do a $3 billion pledge or $2 billion pledge for the next 10 to 15 years. Well, I forgot what I ate for breakfast yesterday. So let alone reminding myself to remember what company so-and-so said that you're gonna do for the next 10 to 15 years. And one of the things that the study showed is that DE&I positions have been decreased 20, 30% post George Floyd.
Yep.
So we rushed to hire DE&I folks and teams. Some companies are more mature than others, and they get it, and they were not late and behind the ball. But for the ones that were late and behind the ball, you check the box, rush to hire talent, and then now those same people are now unemployed, which means there is no strategy, there is no plan, and you ultimately did not care. And so it just shows that there's a difference between true practice,
Yep.
true inclusion, true leadership, and there's a difference in that. But going back to your point on why it matters, there's a study that came out in 2021, 2022, post George Floyd, a pledge to, pull my notes here, pledge to progress, from pledge to progress 1 year post George Floyd. And it talked about employees by ethnicity who had to take authorized time off of work due to racial trauma and systematic racism. So Black men had to take authorized time off of work at 29% in the workplace, followed by Black females at 23%, followed by Asian men at 21%, Hispanic men at 20%, white men at 18%, and then Asian women at 13%. So literally, so again, mental health issues, that goes back to a disability, whether it's seen or unseen. And so literally, by not fostering a belonging environment in the workplace, we're setting up our talent to fail, to not be productive, to not be innovative. And like you said, as a tech company, productivity and innovation are two things that drive and fuel your business. But if you don't foster that environment, this is what you're creating.
Yeah.
So it matters. Even as a business continuity practitioner, it matters.
It matters.
It's unrealistic to think that it doesn't matter. And it's unrealistic to think that it shouldn't be, that we can't be uncomfortable. I never lost weight by being comfortable. So why do we feel like we're any different?
And as practitioners, we are always put in uncomfortable positions. How do we make our programs better? By being uncomfortable, from testing, and that's which people don't like to do because they think they're going to fail. We're looking to fail, but we use that, what we call failure, as a way to improve our planning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good segue into my last question, actually. It might be lobbing the ball somewhat. But if you're CMT, if there is no diversity, whether it be culturally, racially, or other, what are you recommending to practitioners here today, to the resilience coaches in the audience today, to make that change?
James?
I love our profession for a lot of reasons. One of them is I think everyone in this room, we are good at asking questions that no one else wants to ask. Like, that's how we mitigate risk, is we ask questions and we bring up topics that people have either ignored or glossed over. And I think we can do the same thing to start to initiate this conversation in our organizations. Hey, we want to be as resilient as possible. Hey, we need diversity of thought to come up with innovative solutions and to mitigate risk. And how are we doing that if our crisis management team, if our business continuity team or policies don't reflect our employee base, our stakeholders, the communities that we're involved in? So we start by just having those conversations with your frontline manager, with the crisis management team. Like Lisa said, we're used to having uncomfortable conversations. hey, how come my budget is $3? How come I run BC for 5,000 or 100,000 employees?
And I can't get a tool.
And I can't get a tool, or I can't get a part-time person.
I'm
So
a
we're
team of
used
one.
to
Right.
asking questions our managers don't want to hear anyway. So here's another one just
There you
to
go.
throw it on there.
I mean, and it's no different. I mean, it's no different in our, you know, in their different ways of thinking when we're doing our planning and you know, for enterprise, you know, enterprise resilience. It's a culmination of different thought processes. We bring people in from risk. We bring people who know how to do business continuity. We bring people in that know IT. Same thing. We're bringing in people that have different backgrounds, who've had experienced crises in a certain way or a different way that can bring perspective to only mature our programs. It's the same thought process. We are talking about what are some of the special skills that we all have, those specialties that we all have, that we can bring to the table to only make our organizations better.
Is there anything final to add before we jump into Q&A?
So I think as a practitioner, totally agree in asking questions. We are there to elevate risk. And one way that we do that is by asking questions, right? So I think two that we've already, talked about, who are we intentionally or unintentionally excluding? Who is not at the table that we should have here? And then I think secondly, just because of our setting, raise your hand if you have a vendor who you've hired for your program. Only 5 of us? Okay, all right. So how do we ask our vendors about what they're doing? And how do you start holding people accountable who you buy from? So what I have seen that James has done, especially post George Floyd, which is really how our friendship kind of took off more, he will not get on the panel if everybody on the panel looks like him.
Yep.
Period. You couldn't pay James Green to do it. Which means he's probably missing out on money. Mm-hmm. But because of his values and what he believes in, he's made a commitment. Investing in the future of resilience is more about our money. It's about a commitment. So we look at iluminr. You could have talked about your product for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Thank you for not doing that.
I did Microsimulate it.
Look, we appreciate it. You silently gave us the value of your product in 1 hour and 15-minute conversation, but you invited people on this stage who look different than you, who come from different backgrounds. You're from Australia. You have this looks different in your country. Mm-hmm. But you decided to bring in different people to utilize your space and your time to have a different conversation. So it then goes back to, with all the other sponsors and the vendors, what are you doing with the time that you have on this stage?
Yep.
And who are you promoting? And as a buyer, who are you bringing to the table? I have customers that are adamant about asking us our strategy. I have customers who refuse to buy from companies where everybody looks the same. So you can influence inside of your business, you can influence with your vendors.
Yep.
Great, love it. Love getting a plug in an answer. Thank you very much, Vanessa.
No, but it's a very valuable point, right? We can't have these conferences without vendors. We don't have our industry without vendors, and we need to use our purchasing power as practitioners to ask vendors, what are you doing about issues that matter to me? That's really important.
100%. Well, let's roll into Q&A because there are a few questions coming through. First one, how do we stop us versus them to everything DEI? Whew.
Yeah, I think one thing for me, one of the goals, the ultimate goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion is to create a sense of belonging. So it shouldn't be, I'm gonna have Vanessa instead of James. I'm gonna have Marcus instead of Lisa. It's not supposed to be either or. There's all 4 of us here. There's all the people in the room. So including another person, including another point of view doesn't mean you're excluding You're just bringing more people in. There's not a finite like pie where there's only 8 pieces of pie. Oh, okay, I gave, look at me, I've eaten 3, so there's only 5 left. That's not how it should be. So it shouldn't be an us versus them. It's be who are the people who are not in the room that we need to bring into the room.
This is a loaded question, but I'm a person of faith, and I have a little cousin who brought someone home who doesn't look like any of my family. And he was very concerned of how the family would respond to him. And I told him, I said, when you read the book of faith that I believe in, there's nothing in there about black, about white, about yellow, about anything. The one race is the human race. And we are more alike than we are different. And I think that the one way that, or one thing that we can do to stop the us versus them is, number one, stop allowing politicians to guide that conversation. But number two, I think that we have an opportunity to get to know people on a people level and build a relationship. Because literally, we have so much in common, and we allow what we see and the difference that we can visibly see, we allow that to be the barrier when it's really not.
Yeah, 100%. Lisa, anything final to add to that?
Ditto.
Divert to Vanessa. Okay, the next question's come through. So is DEI really an issue for BCDR? I look around and I see loads of diversity and have never felt anything but inclusion in this community. Well,
I'll take this. This is a loaded question too, and I'm fired up about this one. This is awesome.
James is fired up.
Yes.
Here we go.
Yes, it is an issue. And yes, when you look around this room, you do see diversity, you do see inclusion, because everyone who's in this room, my alarm went off this morning. I was not a happy camper with you, Marcus. It was early. If you're in this session at 8 a.m. and you were out late last night, a few of you, I saw you at the bars.
Take one to know one.
This exact, hey, if you're in a session on DEI at a business continuity conference at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, it's important to you. So for the people in this room, it's probably not an issue. Bob Arnold and DRJ have been very vocal about leading the way on this topic. They have asked other conferences to participate. It's been a little quiet from other conferences. Bob's lost some business because of his belief in this. So you're kind of self-selecting out. Where I think it's important is bringing this back to your organizations. Maybe not all organizations see this as an important issue, and not a lot of organizations see how this leads to the resilience in their organization. So yes, in this room today at this conference, there is a huge amount of inclusion. We do have a sense of community. That's one of the reasons I love DRJ so much, but you have, we've all kind of self-selected into this session today and into this conference this week.
Yeah. Vanessa?
So, agree with James. Yes, it's an issue, because not talking about it shows up like you don't care. And if you show up like you don't care, then I'm a part of that 29%, 23%, 21% who leave work and take authorized time off for mental health issues because I'm walking into an environment where maybe my leadership doesn't know how to communicate across difference. So yes, it does matter. Just because the role is something different, or you might have a technical role, look around your workforce. How often are you talking about that? So for example, when George Floyd was murdered, I've said this before at a previous conference, it was like business as usual. It's like, somebody just got lynched on modern day TV while we're all at home in a pandemic, and there's no excuse, we all saw it. So what we're not gonna do is ask me to come back to work and sit in a meeting and have a conversation like this didn't happen. We're gonna talk about this today. And if you don't talk about it, you're not considering different people's and their perspectives. It doesn't matter what you look like. We had a white male who worked on our team. He was a former police chief. George Floyd and the protests impacted him. He's a different person because of it. So it's not okay to not talk about it. We have to have conversations. And even if it's just asking, hey, I saw this on the news the other day, how is this impacting you? And your response might be, I don't have an impact. Or, you know what, thanks for asking, but I don't want to talk about it. At least you asked. And now they now know, okay, this person cares. And ultimately what that means is, you see me.
Yeah, I just think about the personal growth I've gone through and the challenging conversations we've had in preparing for this session. Like, I've gone from here to here just in basic awareness as a starting point. So, and that's the very beginning, I think, of my journey. Absolutely. Lisa, is there anything final you want to add to that before we move?
I was just going to say, is this room inclusive? Yes. Do you see some diversity? Yes. But it took a long time to get here, let's be honest. I mean, I've been coming to these conferences, I want to say, a while. And similar to Vanessa, if there were 5 women here, that was a lot. Mm-hmm. If there were 2 minorities, that was tremendous. But we had to get to this point where now I see more women, I see more diversity in minorities, I see more thought leadership. Yep. Think about that. When I first started to come here, you know, we had that focus on business continuity, but it was a very strong DR focus.
Correct. Yeah.
Now we're talking about BC, and now we're talking about risks. It's a progression that we're including all these conversations. So whether what a person looks like, whether it's the thought leadership, all those different things, it only comes when you have these conversations, when you include people. But make no mistake, when we go back to our organizations, do we reflect the same thing? Again, most of us, I'm not gonna say most of us, many of us are teams of one. How does that say diversity, or how does that say inclusiveness? So just something to think about.
Very good. We have about 3 minutes to answer one last question. I'm really just putting James on notice because he talks a lot. So as resilience professionals, do we have a responsibility to influence HR to ensure inclusivity in the hiring process? Educating people managers about neurodiversity to ensure qualified applicants are not overlooked because they are different. Recruitment, taking it right back to recruitment. Let's get out of the war room for a moment. Any thoughts in terms of our place in that recruitment process? Lisa, I'll start with you.
Yes, particularly when it comes, okay, so let's talk about these BC job descriptions that we're writing. We put the kitchen sink in these job descriptions and expect to have someone. First of all, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. I'll put an abstract in for that. But seriously, I think we need, when we are writing job descriptions, the amount of things that could be considered unconscious biases within a job description are as important. Prime example, if we are looking for a security person and we say this man must have, you've already eliminated half the audience. Because women, we take it literally when you say this man must have. So we already count ourselves out, let's be honest. So it is important that when we need to have a conversation or work with our HR person, particularly when it comes to job descriptions and the whole like. So I know we're running out of time, but yes.
James?
Quick.
Yeah, really quick. So who here went to college or university for business continuity or resilience? Raise your hand. Nobody.
No one? No.
Who here had a business continuity certification before you had a business continuity job?
I did.
All right, we're going to talk later, you 3 people. So to Lisa's point, why do we make those requirements for entry-level business continuity jobs when none of us in the room, except you 3 that we're going to talk later, none of us had those certifications or that degree when we started in this profession, but we now require people who come into this profession to have those? You're greatly narrowing your applicant pool, and you're really restricting the diversity of people who are qualified to take that entry-level job.
Drop your mic.
And I'm dropping. I'll drop my water.
Final thoughts?
Ditto.
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 Excellent. Well, I think that probably wraps up our session. Thank you very much for everyone who's participated today. This is not an easy topic. It's a big topic. It's an uncomfortable topic. I'm way out of my comfort zone the whole way through this and preparing for it and executing it. It's been challenging, but it's been a journey of personal growth, and I appreciate your time to also take the time out, get up at 8 a.m. after being in a speakeasy, no doubt, behind a blue door, and join us on this journey. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
So thank you. What I'll add to Marcus before I transition us out to our break, when we prepped for this, it was heavy for us. And we had to kind of take a second and like, y'all, this is heavy. So if it's heavy for us and we're all friends here, can you imagine how the audience might feel when we have this conversation? So we really appreciate you for being here. Thank you to iluminr for being a platinum sponsor.